South Korea. South Korea is the one example of a governmental example of what it is to give God the glory at the government level for things to begin to change. Amen. Generosity in the midst of poverty. What does that mean for us? What did that mean for the church of Pentecost? What did that mean for that first century church? That meant that if the only thing I gotta eat is a corn tortilla with salt and a black cup of coffee, we all drink and eat the same thing. Amen. I don't let things go spoil in my refrigerator. When perhaps there's some of you that need a box of eggs, a dozen eggs. We must find a way to bring the common good, to be able to share and partake. Someone once told me, you know what? We live in communities of strangers. You see all these developers, they develop communities. Communities of what? Community of people that don't know who their neighbors are. Don't dare to reach out to the neighbors. But we are different. We have a different mandate. And the mandate that we have is that we need to be generous. Even in the places where no one wants to go, we need to be generous. We need to be willing. I need to be willing to give what I have. Even if it means to skip a meal. For someone who hasn't had a meal in a very long time, right here in the United States of America. Amen. There was not an needy person among them. Okay, unity can only be possible by the unifying power and the reconciling peace of the Holy Spirit. Is the only way that unity can take place. Now, there's a widening gap here in our country today. And the widening gap is the group of the haves, those that have something, and the groups of the have-nots, those that don't have anything. When we look together and we look, oh yeah, it is a very wealthy country, but what does that mean for the church? What does that mean? Should it mean that in the church we should have the ones that have everything and plenty, and should the membership of the church should also have a big segment of the ones that have nothing or have very little? But we're called by God to be able to bridge that gap. And that's what the church did. That when the Holy Spirit came and the apostles led the church, they made sure that the ones that had and the ones that had not was not emphasized. But that they emphasized that all things were held in common. Hallelujah. Oh yes. And it says that those who were possessors of lands and houses, they sold them. They sold them for what? So they can reinvest the money and buy somewhere else where land is cheap? So they can go across the border and buy 3 or 4 properties and rent them out. They sold them. And they brought the proceeds before the apostles' feet. And they said, here it is. We need to bless those that have nothing. Yes, when we live in a capitalist society, this is a part of a message that is hard to swallow. Because all of a sudden, it sounds too communist. It sounds too socialist. Well, I've been through that. And it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing when the government tells you you need to give something, you need to give it up. But you know there are abuses happening. But when you give everything you got, because He has given you everything He's got. Big difference. Like in that church, we just finished collecting the forms for the 2010 census. And I hope everyone here submitted their forms. But there's a lot of talk going on out there. Guess what they're thinking about calling this century in the United States? The Latino century. You know why? Because we have multiplied like no other ethnic group has multiplied in this country right here. For about 5 to 7 years, we have held the #1 consuming power in the United States of America. U.S. News Magazine about 4 or 5 years ago reported that if we knew that if we Latino, I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't know if you speak Spanish or you don't speak Spanish, but if you got Latino blood in you, you're part of it. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you look Indian like me. People think I'm from Pakistan, from Iran, from all over the country. I wonder if God's calling me to all these places. That's the beauty of the Latino community. I don't know if you only identify with English because you were born here but your parents are from Latin America, or you're second or third generation. It doesn't matter. If it's in your blood, you're one of us. Whether you want to be or not, you're one of us. We have not only multiplied, but we hold the #1 economic consuming power. We consume more than anyone else in the United States. By the year 2030 or 2050, it's just a matter of time. Latinos will be the majority here. But I got a question for you. If this century will be called or identified as a Latino century in the United States of America, the question I have for us as a church is, what is the La Trinidad Church, a diversified, culturally diversified church, going to be willing to do in this century when the world has identified us as a big influence for our society? You see, being the majority is not a privilege. It really is a responsibility. Because Luke 12:48, Jesus said, "For everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required." That is us. So today's question is, if we don't do that, what is that? The two things we learned today, the two themes: unity among diversity and generosity in the midst of poverty. If we don't do that, then who will? Who's going to do that? The church of the first century answered the call. The church of the first century put things in perspective and said, we can't have widows and homeless people not be attended. We need to attend them. We need to serve them. We need to bless them. We can't have people, imagine, the church being born. No one had an idea of what Christianity should be all about, or had to be all about, or needed to be all about. There were a work in progress. But I am happy the church did not start as a legal entity. The church was not born being a tax-exempt entity, a 501c3 based on the tax code of any given country. I am happy the church was not born because someone said, there's a group of people who speak in a different tongue and they think they got it all. Let's ought to give them a name. I am happy that's not the way the church started. The way the church started, it started as a movement. Amen. And one thing about a movement is that it can't move unless it has life inside of it. We started as a movement, following one, Jesus. Let us not become too institutionalized. Let us not become too corporate. I love being part of a movement. Being part of God's movement on this earth. I'm going to ask you to please stand.